welcome to Not Now in Theaters. This is a retro and cult film podcast taking you back to movies we remember and why, or highlighting underseen films that could use some more love. I'm Will Turntail, a writer and film fan from California. This episode is all about Night of the Creeps. It's a cult classic horror comedy. It's got a lot of dark and zombie-like things, but there's a lot of love and levity to it. I had never seen this movie until now, if you can believe that. Always seen a poster for it or people posting about it on social media, and only now finally getting around to seeing it. Anyhow, let's get into the movie. Fred Dekker's Night of the Creeps is a heartfelt love letter to classic B movies. A love letter that, since it is about young people in love, tragically lost lives, and parasitic slugs, might be caked in a bit of slime around the edges. Night of the Creeps is having a laugh, but much like Tom Holland's Fright Night, covered in episode 20 of this podcast actually, the movie is having fun with the genre rather than making fun of it. Dekker says in the documentary Thrill Me, Making Night of the Creeps, that he wanted all the things from his childhood that he loved. Space aliens, zombies, pretty girls who may or may not have clothes on, and he jammed out a script with everything on it in about 2 weeks. And while that truncated timeline may sound like a lack of polish, I think that's a real asset here. When an artist is shooting from the hip like that, just letting everything go and pouring into it with creative control, you draw out your most heartfelt ideas. Dekker didn't have too much assurance the film would get made, but he sent the script boldly, or perhaps nervously, with his fingers covering his eyes, attaching himself as director. And boom! Producer Charles Gordon of the famous Gordon Brothers loved the film, and it was eventually moved into production. It said Dekker was young enough, or at least young looking enough, that he could be mistaken for a cast member. And in the Thrill Me documentary, producer Gordon says Dekker was shy during their meetings, but he was take charge on set, and the cast and crew responded well. Soon the dailies, raw unedited footage of the film's day of shooting, it kept coming back unbelievable. Producer Gordon was confident they had a real hit on their hands. But Night of the Creeps didn't creep too high on those box office charts. The movie made a disappointing $600,000 or less on a $5 million budget, according to what I can find online. Ouch. Producer Gordon blames this failure on a poor marketing campaign, and I think he's got a good case here. To give you an idea, in Thrill Me, he points out how similar one of the film's one-sheet promotions is to the 1985 horror movie House. Night of the Creeps one-sheet shows a ghoulish hand trying to unlock a door, and almost the same twisted, undead hand is ringing a doorbell on this House promotion. And I'm talking about two different images that you can actually go look at here in the transcript if you want to use the links, or you can use the links at the bottom of this transcript called Links in this episode to see what I'm talking about with these one-sheet advertisements. They're practically the same thing. Producer Gordon believed that marketing only told audiences they'd already seen this movie, so they didn't have to show up. And like an extra insult, this similarity to House's marketing, at least for this one sheet, is especially sad because Dekker was a writer on House. It's like his own handiwork coming back to haunt him. While I haven't seen the rest of the campaign, I'm willing to take producer Gordon's word for it that it wasn't too creative nor effective. But if you've listened to this podcast before, you know the trend line here. Night of the Creeps' charm factor and its seriously unusual blend of genres helped it hold on to the fans it gathered back in '86 and added plenty more. Reappraisals see the film as a hallmark of 1980s horror. Goofy lines, practical effects, and 1980s plot points. But I had never seen the film. So with all this hype, I was excited to finally sit down and give Night of the Creeps a go. And how did that go? Let's find out. Is Night of the Creeps a good movie? And a note, this movie has two endings, one for a theatrical release and the original one intended by Fred Dekker. This review is for the original ending Dekker intended with The Graveyard, which I believe has been restored for streaming and physical media releases.
You have never had a night like this. Night of the Creeps. If you scream, you're dead.
Night of the Creeps is about these two nerdy-seeming Corman University college students Chris Romero and James Carpenter J.C. Hooper. Chris is love-struck when he spots Cynthia Cronenberg, a student at a frat party. And I can't blame Chris. She's an ultra-cute brunette who carries herself with some self-respect and personality. Unfortunately, she's got herself a boyfriend named Brad, the kind of asshole with the license plates on his red sports car that reads Bradster. Brad has definitely taken over his dad's dealership or whatever someday. And Brad's alpha male status means he's the head of the local Beta Epsilon fraternity. With Chris desperate to go after Cynthia, Chris and JC pledge to the Beta Epsilon frat as a ploy to get closer to her. And for Chris and JC's initiation into the Beta fraternity, Brad demands they find a cadaver and drop it on a rival fraternity's front doorstep. Soon, Chris and JC sneak into a locked lab room on campus. And there, they discover a corpse in a cryogenic freeze, a state of suspended animation. When JC releases the corpse, it seems to wake and touch Chris on the arm. Freaked out, Chris and JC abandon the prank. But little do they know, they just unleashed the first of the creep-carrying zombies on an unsuspecting university. When the wandering creep zombie takes its first victim, Detective Ray Cameron is assigned the mystery. Detective Cameron and the boys become friends, and as more and more people get taken over by the parasitic creeps, can Chris, JC, and Detective Cameron stop them? Just to walk you through this ultra-fine cast of this film, Chris Romero is played by Jason Lively. James Carpenter J.C. Hooper is played by Steve Marshall. Jill Whitlow plays Cynthia Cronenberg. Brad is played by Alan Kazar. Tom Atkins plays Detective Ray Cameron. And you can read the rest of the main cast here in the transcript. You definitely might recognize some of these names, such as the legendary Dick Miller plays someone named Walt. And there's also a cameo from Shane Black. Alright, so what's good in Night of the Creeps? Well, the film is a hell of a lot better than its title credits. I think people like these, but they didn't do it for me. The word creeps unfolds like migrating jello, and the font looks like something from the first version of Microsoft Paint or something. But it's a lot of good stuff from there. First up, it's the film's 2 origin stories, which earns 2 points. Night of the Creeps isn't overly weird, but it's an unorthodox movie, and I loved that about it. We start off with not 1, but 2 origin stories of sorts. The film starts off aboard an alien spacecraft, and we can safely assume they invented or found the creeps. The aliens are played by little people in kooky costumes, running around their ship, firing lasers. They have serious technology, but horrible aim, unable to clock their target, who is straight down a corridor. It's like a stormtrooper's taking the shot, I don't know. One of them, crazed and glazed look in his eye, drops a canister out of the ship that you know full well will be headed for Earth to cause chaos. And seeing these hokey costumes right away, the movie sets the tongue-in-cheek tone for the rest of the movie. And then the movie leans farther into that 1950s B-movie charm. We go for the black and white, corny, 1950s science fiction style. The tone moves into one of those films with the line delivery and shot selections, at least from what I can pretend I know about, resembling the era. There's a police bulletin on the radio announcing the axe-wielding maniac on the loose, and it is all in that old-timey, almost transatlantic accent way. We're introduced to young Detective Cameron, who warns his ex about the axe-wielding maniac, and we watch the parasite, much like in The Blob, crawl out of the split-open canister and take its first victim. With these dual introductions, Dekker's love of throwback films comes at you front and center. And it's very meta. It's a neat way for the audience to understand both the story and how past movies influenced this film simultaneously. The next good thing is the 1980s practicals, which adds 2 points. For all the movie's heart, it's also horror all the way. The creeps are parasitic slugs that enter their human victims through the mouth and implant eggs in their brains. Yuck. It's a parallel idea to movies like The Faculty or action thriller The Hidden, which I reviewed in episode 18 of this podcast. Dekker, being a horror fan, wanted to put zombies in his film, but I liked that the movie wasn't just straight zombies who came to devour. They are slow-moving and brain-dead, but since the creeps are presumably eating their brains, it makes sense. And these effects are pretty awesome, with some famous names helping out like Howard Berger, Robert Kurtzman, and Greg Nicotero. I think Nicotero, he's in the cast, so I think he worked on the film too. That right there would be the 3 guys who founded the famous KNB EFX Group, if I got that right. The effects team uses many simple yet effective throwback techniques. There are plungers to push out the creeps when a head is split open, and I think it's basically an insert shot each time. Someone shoots at a creep. We don't see the effects of the plunger that pushes the creeps out, and cut now to the dead body, which I think is a mold. Simple slot cars were used to send the creeps skittering across the floor, where they attached a line to them and dragged them through the grass, finding shelter in the sorority basement. And there's great makeup. The axe-wielding maniac is right out of a Tales from the Crypt-style skeleton. The creep-infested zombie people are, well, creepy. And the blast damage to any of the creeps is effectively juicy and gory. In the Thrill Me documentary, the crew talks lovingly about their experience with creative control and using their powers to work up solutions. So these are excellent effects for anyone who appreciates this 1980s era stuff, where films were handcrafted and quite personal. And a cool piece of trivia, the effects crew played the creep-infested frat boy zombies in the film. No doubt fun for them and not a bad way to save on cost. Maybe. And then there's Tom Atkins having a good time, which is worth 2 points. In the making of documentary Thrill Me, Tom Atkins lights up when he talks about playing Detective Ray Cameron. He loved the idea of this role, and it shows. Detective Cameron is fun to watch because Atkins is just having a blast. He's full of style, cynical, and constantly smoking at the crime scenes. He wears a classic long coat and cruises around in an old Mercury. It's an old-style detective, but he's not necessarily a hard-boiled, Dashiell Hammett guy. He keeps up with the times and utters some hilarious lines like, "It's Miller time," before blowing away a creep-infested frat boy. And just like in Maniac Cop, which I reviewed in episode 66, Tom Atkins once again enters a horror film as a real detective on a real case, giving us more than just our 2 protagonists. For me, Atkins is the strongest actor in the film. And as the detective, he gives the film a solid anchor that it needed, what with all the genres and influences here. And Atkins steals the show with the film's strongest scene. Dekker must have been happy to give him the monologue where Detective Cameron tells the story of how he lost his high school sweetheart, which I won't spoil, over drags on his cigarette and sips of whiskey. Atkins delivers lines perfectly. "I found her in the car, and on the road, and in the woods." It's a scene that gets more and more eerie, the score rising, the camera pushing farther and farther in on Atkins. We feel Detective Cameron's loss, and we're given the backstory of his life, as well as the source of all his cynicism. Believe me, if you haven't seen the movie before, you'll know this scene when you get to it. And now for the film's moments of heart, which adds 3 points. None of the creeps should be all gross and not touchy-feelies, and the movie is definitely not sappy. But for a film where people's heads split open and slugs fall out, there's a lot more passion and human experience going on than advertised. Jill Whitlow's Cynthia Cronenberg is adoringly cute, but with the sand to stand up for herself. She's happy to give Brad the finger, the old 1980s winding it up style. So she's got some values in there. And by the end of the film, Cynthia takes a page out of fellow 1986 character Ripley from Aliens. She straps on a flamethrower and helps to kick some ass. I'd call that a spoiler, but it's on the movie poster, okay? A lot of 1980s films just had a female airhead the boys drooled over, but Cynthia, much like the sisters of 1984's Night of the Comet, which I reviewed in episode 1 of this show, is a real character. Nerds Against Jocks plays as a subtle theme here, but it's not Revenge of the Nerds. It's not a raunchy film in any way. It's more subtle, like the fact that many frat guys are the ones who will be turning into the creeps. JC has a disability, and many audiences point out that they appreciate how his walking on crutches was just part of the movie. And I liked it for his character. Maybe in part because of that disability, JC knows how to talk and stand up for himself. When Chris won't go talk to Cynthia at the beginning of the movie, JC isn't afraid to find a way to get rid of the jock with the unibrow who is chatting her up and make the motions for Chris. And perhaps having that disability made JC have to get stronger. He's also not afraid of Brad, talking back to him, though paying the price when Brad knocks him down. So when it's fleshed out, plucky characters, the film holds all that heart. Though I do have to say, just when I thought the movie was playing it all so tasteful, well, a shower scene came out. Everyone is getting ready for the big event, with the women's parts, of course, out. Okay, and a spoiler alert for this next one, okay? Skip ahead if you don't want to hear it. I bet a lot of audiences can't forget the audio note that JC leaves for Chris on the tape recorder, revealing his love for Chris and lamenting the creeps that have invaded his brain. JC gets to have a special power, in that I don't think any of the other people taken over by creeps were able to speak about the problem. But the playing of JC's last words is a moving moment, the end of their friendship by death, as JC tells Chris how to fight back against the creeps and says his goodbyes. I love that Dekker gave the characters a chance to do this, and it is something you don't see in some horror films that treat their characters as throwaways. Just giving JC that line about loving Chris makes it clear that Dekker really cared about these characters he made, and we, the audience, bond with them through it. Next, shotguns and flames, which are worth 2 points. I know, that sounds like something worth 6 points, but I gotta be honest, it's a 2-point load, okay? And another spoiler alert here, okay? If you don't want to hear spoilers, you can use the chapter skip. So who doesn't love it when an ordinary guy and girl get called on to become heroes? The film's finale delivers a satisfying payoff, what with the busload of former frat boy creeps showing up at the sorority house. Chris and Cynthia, with a shotgun and a flamethrower, take on the mob outside while Detective Cameron defends the girls inside. And all this chaos is fun. I love the spinning cam shot of Ray Cameron / Tom Atkins firing his weapon, taking out some of the creeps. And I do have to say, Chris is such a gentleman for putting the flamethrower on Cynthia. She's tough and maybe could have handled the kick of that shotgun, but giving her something to fight back with was a solid move. And because all of this action is characterized, it doesn't feel like a boilerplate battle against hold-up people and a zombie horde. For example, one scene Dekker plants earlier in the film, the character who keeps rescuing the cat by the double doors, pays off beautifully when, this time, finally, a zombie comes crashing through. So what did I think could be improved in Night of the Creeps? The first thing is the film's pacing and weight, which removes 3 points. And again, spoiler alerts here. I'm sorry, there are just a lot of spoilers in this review. Dekker has revealed that he received many studio notes on the pacing, yet the finished film still has issues for me. Everything is building up to that finale, as we keep seeing the creeps hiding out around the sorority. But even with just an 88-minute runtime, the pacing is, if you'll forgive me this awful pun, sluggish. When I look over the story again, it's hard for me to say exactly where I would have sped things up. But I think there's some fat to it around the beginning to the middle. We get the initial cryogenic zombie who ends up taking out the grad student. And then the grad student who takes out the janitor. And coming up next, it's the revived axe-wielding maniac. But as much as I appreciate this progression in the investigation, it's a slow chain to get to the real fun of the finale, where it's all pandemonium. And that's another thing about this film. I love the Ray Cameron character. Chris, JC, and Cynthia are good, but adding Detective Cameron is what really gives the film that extra piece that sets it apart. But when you have a detective solving a mystery, but the audience already knows what's up, I don't think that's always the most interesting thing. Maybe if Detective Cameron had found out something about the creeps that we didn't know, it would have been more worthwhile. And then this one is called More Attacks? Like more attacks as in a question, and not Mars attacks. That will remove 2 points. Yes, more spoilers, okay? Another warning. IMDb's trivia page for the film says that after test audiences watched a rough cut, they thought the movie needed more action. So the tool shed sequence was added to the movie. And as much as I love the tool shed part, I think the rest of the film still could have used more moments like that. The film is not that long. There's a good build to it all, but the fun action part is so backloaded into the finale, and I wish more of the movie could have been along these lines of the tool shed scene, people fighting off the creeps. And lumping this in with the last point I made about the pacing, I think that's it. the film kills off, in slasher-type fashion, the grad student we don't meet for long, the janitor we barely know, the axe maniac comes back. Maybe the movie could have reformatted the film a bit so these weren't kills but casualties, as the school grounds are increasingly taken over by the creep zombies. I think you can still fit Detective Cameron into that mold. And lastly, it's the plot road not taken. -0 points for this, okay? After all, it's Night of the Creeps. We're just having fun here. But one thing I think is strange is how there's this body that gets found with a creep inside of it. It is put into cryogenic freezing. When it's released from freezing, Detective Cameron is going around to figure out what's going on. Well, who put this body in the freezer in the 1950s? How did they not have an outbreak of creeps back then? And once the zombie was released from this lab experiment, well, how is it that nobody seems to be notified? Did I miss something here? I think there's a missing character or set of characters here. If you've ever watched The Blob 1988, which, yes, I know, here it comes, I reviewed in episode 54 of this podcast. Sorry, I'm just having fun pointing these out. You eventually learn more about the creature's origins through the G-men that show up in The Blob. And I wonder if this movie would benefit from giving us more about what happened or having someone trying to account for this body. You'd think somebody figured out that this thing had to be preserved somehow. Why else would it have been in there? Like I said, I'm not bashing this movie for not having this in the film. It succeeds without it, but I really think it's an open door that could have been walked through. Alright, so adding it all up, Night of the Creeps scores 6 points. On my scale of let's not watch, should I watch, or go watch this movie, I'm going to award Night of the Creeps my should I watch rating, which basically means I like the movie and it's good for genre fans, okay? The film is an odd blend of earnest and heartfelt, of paying homage to many things, yet also all sorts of disgusting things. Because it is based on so many films, it won't shock you with its concept. But it definitely is enjoyable enough as a horror film that you want to see what's going to happen next. If you had a criticism, it would be that the movie has some pacing problems. You can tell it is building into a finale. These creepy slug things scuttling around are going to come get people. And as soon as you hear about the event at the end, you think, oh, the zombie-like things are going to crash the event. They actually crash the planning stage, but that's not the point. The point is you do have to, in part, wait around for this payoff. And I think a few more skirmishes with the creeps along the way could have helped that. Still, it's worth a watch for horror fans, especially horror comedy fans and fans of retro films. The legacy of Night of the Creeps. So what's the legacy of Night of the Creeps? Well, one thing you can say about it is that it did the horror/comedy blend when that was more of an emerging thing than a really established thing. John Landis did that with An American Werewolf in London. Joe Dante would be all about that with Gremlins. And we mentioned Tom Holland's Fright Night. So I'm not saying this movie invents the mix, but it helps propel the train. And I'm sure this movie has influenced filmmakers in the genre, right? I haven't specifically researched that, but I'm certain it's out there. As mentioned, the movie is a cult classic, with many fans discovering it in later years. The film was released on VHS and Laserdisc in 1986, but then it received DVD and Blu-ray releases in October of 2009 from Sony Pictures Entertainment. Scream Factory re-released it on Blu-ray in June of 2019 with extra special features. So you can tell the movie has current-day fans. One thing I didn't talk about, Barry Dvorak did the soundtrack. It brings some excellent atmosphere. And for those of you who don't know him, that is the guy who did The Warriors. So that's at least 2 cult movies in his filmography. I love to rate movie posters even though I'm not good at art. I would say this film has an okay movie poster. You've got Chris and Cynthia with the flamethrower and the shotgun standing outside the sorority house with a horde of zombies coming at them. That's a little misleading because I wouldn't classify this as a total zombie film. And that's another point about the marketing, you know? I wouldn't pitch this because it makes it look like a typical castle defense, zombie horde is after us movie. It's not false advertising, but the film is about space slugs and falling in love, oddly enough. There's a kick-ass collector's edition cover, with Tom Atkins from a low angle, front and center of course. The three main characters are bursting out of the building, all with their weapons, and this one is much more intriguing as an update. I highly recommend checking that one out. Originally, Fred Dekker wanted to shoot the movie in black and white, and I would have loved to see what a black and white cut of the movie would have been like. In case you didn't notice, the last names of the main characters are references to famous horror and science fiction directors. You've got George A. Romero, John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, David Cronenberg, James Cameron, John Landis, Sam Raimi, Roger Corman, and Steve Miner all in the film in some way. And the film is said to be littered with Easter eggs for horror fans, so many people find it rewatchable. IMDb's trivia page points out that Phil's Diner is in all of Fred Dekker's movies since this one. I'll have to check them out and see. I don't remember it in RoboCop 3, which, yeah, if you didn't know, is also a Fred Dekker movie. But like most people, probably including Fred Dekker himself, I'd rather not remember RoboCop 3 too well because it just isn't good. I watched it for the first time in years a few years ago, maybe even last year, and yeah, Fred Dekker directed that dud. And I feel bad for him, as I think the studio interference and all the family-friendly RoboCop stuff did it in. But that's an episode for another time. Lastly, if you didn't know this, Fred Dekker is very good friends with writer, director, actor Shane Black. They were roommates, it seems. I'm sure I'm not the first one to refer to them as a dynamic duo known as Black and Dekker, but how awesome is that? Okay, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I have a blast making these episodes, and it's amazing that there are some of you out there that listen in. If you like this episode, would you please take a minute or two to leave me a review or rating on this podcast, if you haven't done that already, of course. It makes a massive difference for this small but growing podcast, and I think it's quick to tap a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever cool app you are using to find this show. Or if you're listening on YouTube, hit that like button and subscribe. New episodes of this podcast usually come out weekly, so I hope you'll tune in next week for something cult, retro, underseen, or whatever. There aren't a lot of rules here. This podcast episode is production copyright of Overegged Media LLC, located in Sacramento, California. Reference photos linked in the transcript are copyrighted by the Internet Movie Database. This review's factual information was gathered through online sources like Wikipedia, IMDb, or interviews. Misrepresentations and errors are possible, but unintentional. The introduction music was Neon Laser Horizon by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. The exit music was Voxel Revolution by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. And the additional music was Danger Storm, Andrea's Theme, and Secrets of the Schoolyard. You guessed it, all by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, all licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. See you next time.